You wake up one morning and something feels different. The room is the same. The coffee smells the same. The calendar still hangs on the wall. But you notice a small gap between who you are and who you used to be. It feels like a slight loosening of a seam, a quiet sliding of furniture inside your chest. You don't panic. You observe. You let the feeling sit with you, like a guest who arrived to tell you one thing. You're changing. You've lived a life that fits you like an old jacket. It was comfortable, familiar, full of habits that made sense. The same route to work, the same group of friends, the same hobbies that never demanded much courage. That jacket kept you warm. It sheltered you through predictable weather. But lately, you find the sleeves too short, the collar rubbing at your neck. You don't necessarily hate it. You just notice that it no longer feels like you. One of the hardest things about outgrowing your old life is that growth often arrives quietly. It doesn't trumpet itself. It slips into mornings and lingers in offhand moments. You might notice it in the books you pick up, in the podcasts you listen to, or in the people whose voices you no longer find yourself matching. Small shifts stack together and eventually form a tipping point. You begin to choose differently. You start saying no more easily. It's not dramatic. It isn't about refusing everything. It's a softer, steadier change. You decline invitations that drain you. You stop agreeing to plans that feel performative. You realize that no is not a rebuke of others, but a preservation of something you're becoming. With each careful no, you carve out room for what actually matters. Loneliness walks in quietly during this time. It has nothing to do with being alone, and everything to do with being unaligned. When you begin to diverge from old patterns, you'll notice spaces where people used to be. Conversations that once fit now feel like wearing someone else's words. That loneliness can be sharp, but it's also a sign. It's signaling that the ecosystem of your life is changing. The familiar flora friends, routines, comforts are not necessarily gone because they're bad. They simply no longer nourish the new soil you're cultivating. You'll find yourself craving different conversations. The small talk that used to serve as lubricant feels hollow. You want depth. You want to speak about ideas that swell slowly, about fears that hide behind jokes, about ambitions that are tender and terrifying. You seek people who can hold complexity without flattening it with certainty. That doesn't mean the people you knew were shallow. It means you're listening for frequencies you didn't notice before. There's a shift in priorities that accompanies this transformation. Money and status might feel less magnetic. You may still appreciate financial security, but you begin to weigh it differently. The time you spend matters more. You ask whether a job or a job title gives you space to be curious, or whether it boxes you into repeating the past. You start to value mornings that feel soft and afternoons that allow for reading, for thinking, for being with your own mind. You notice how your tastes evolve. The music you once loved may start to sound flat. Your wardrobe slowly simplifies or becomes intentionally expressive. You replace noise with silence and familiar routines with deliberate experiments. Meals change. Exercise becomes less about punishment and more about embodiment. Even the way you spend weekends shifts from frantic catching up to deliberate recovery. These changes are small on their own, but together, they reroute your life. When you outgrow your old life, you also start to reevaluate relationships. Some relationships expand easily. They bend and adapt, absorbing your new edges without losing integrity. Others tighten like a clasp that no longer opens. You may feel guilt when you step back from people who shaped you. You might replay moments and search for where the change happened. But growth doesn't always come with the consent of everyone around you. It's not a betrayal if who you are becoming no longer fits someone else's expectations. Boundaries become clearer. You learn what you will tolerate and what you won't. Saying no becomes an act of self-respect rather than selfishness. You protect your energy. You protect your attention. People who respect your changes are rare and precious. They don't need you to stay the same. They meet you halfway or cheer from the sidelines. The rest of the world recalibrates. Some doors close. New doors you didn't see before begin to open. Part of outgrowing involves mourning. Change asks you to let go of identities you've held tightly. You might grieve a version of yourself that was brave in different ways. The person who stayed longer at a job out of loyalty, or the one who never left a comfort zone. Allowing yourself to be sad is not regression. It's human. Tears and disappointment mean you're still connected to what that life taught you. They are part of the compost that helps new things grow. Alongside mourning, there is curiosity. Curiosity becomes your compass. You start to act like a beginner again. You try new hobbies, not because you expect to master them, but because you want to see who you are when you try. You take small risks that feel more like experiments than life or death gambles. You read books outside your usual genres. You watch films that don't promise immediate pleasure. Curiosity gently expands your sense of what's possible. You'll notice a thinning of tolerance for certain narratives. Self-criticism becomes more biting if it's not tempered with self-compassion. You start to notice repetitive thought patterns that kept you stuck. Maybe you used to tell yourself that you needed to be perfect to be loved. Or maybe you believed that success required constant proving. As you change, those stories come into sharper focus. You interrogate them more carefully. You're less willing to let them run the show. Decision-making shifts too. Where you once made choices to avoid discomfort, you now make choices to align with your values. That alignment doesn't always look obvious. Sometimes it means choosing the harder route that grows your patience, or choosing rest over hustle. Because rest is what fuels your creativity. You measure success differently. Instead of external markers, you check how decisions feel in your body and whether your choices let you breathe more easily. Your relationship with solitude transforms. Solitude no longer feels like exile. It becomes a sanctuary. You discover that being alone can be nourishing. It gives you time to listen to the small, honest voice inside you. You start to enjoy the quiet mornings when the world is still and your thoughts are yours alone. Those moments teach you to carry your own company without panic. As you change, your inner critic might protest. It often speaks loudly at transitions, trying to pull you back into familiar safety. It will remind you of risks and replay past mistakes. Don't be surprised by that voice. It's a survival mechanism trying to keep you in known territory. Listen to it, but don't let it be the final authority. Hold your own counsel. You'll find your courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to move forward in spite of it. You'll also notice a new appreciation for limits. Once you wanted to do everything. Now you understand that focus is power. You choose fewer things and give them more of your heart. This narrowing doesn't feel like deprivation. It feels like refinement. You spend energy like currency, mindful of where it yields the most return, in joy and meaning. Work will probably look different. You might crave work that is meaningful or flexible. Or maybe you'll want to build something of your own. It's tempting to romanticize sudden leaps and radical reinventions. But real change often happens gradually. Small choices at work, setting a boundary around emails, asking for different projects, or developing a skill can compound. Those tiny adjustments eventually create a new trajectory. When your priorities shift, so does your time. You'll find yourself protecting mornings for reflection or learning. You might schedule deliberate downtime and treat it like a non-negotiable. You stop apologizing for rest. Rest becomes productive. It regenerates your capacity to engage with life more fully and creatively. As you outgrow your old life, you discover new kinds of joy. They're quieter, less performative. You savor small victories. A sentence you wrote that surprised you. A conversation that felt true. A walk where your mind unclenched. Joy becomes less about big events and more about presence. You begin to notice beauty in places you previously skimmed past. A sunset's slow dimming. A neighbor's gentle wave. The way steam curls off your tea. There's also a practical side to this change. Your habits matter. You create systems that support who you're becoming. You might curate your social media feed to include more inspiration and less noise. You build routines that center your mental health. You organize your space so it feels like a reflection of your present self, not a museum of your past. These practical acts are quiet scaffolding for a larger transformation. Financial choices get recalibrated too. You might prioritize spending on experiences over things, or choose to invest in learning that stretches you. Money becomes a tool aligned with values rather than a status symbol. You might still save, still plan, but your budget will reflect the life you're moving toward rather than the life you're leaving behind. You'll probably face questions from others. People may ask why you seem different. They'll look for the old jokes, the old rhythms. Some will lean in with curiosity. Others will pull back, quietly uncomfortable with ambiguity. That's okay. Their reactions reveal where they are, not where you must stay. Your responsibility is to move with integrity, not to shepherd everyone along at your pace. When you outgrow a relationship, you might try to explain the change. You might have conversations that are tender and clear. Sometimes, clarity helps. Other times, it doesn't change the outcome. You learn to accept that you can be honest without controlling the responses of others. You can be kind without diluting the truth of your experience. Your sense of time shifts too. You start to live more in seasons than in endless repetition. You understand that life is cyclical. There will be times of intense growth, times of consolidation, times of rest. This seasonal thinking softens the urgency to fix everything at once. You give projects space to breathe and yourself permission to try and fail. You'll experiment with identity. You might introduce new labels to yourself or drop old ones. Labels can be helpful, but they can also be limiting. You'll learn to use them like tools, helpful when precise, flexible when outdated. The self you thought you were at 25 or 35 might not fit at 40. That's not a problem. It's evolution. As this process continues, you'll notice your values sharpening. They act like a North Star. You'll find it easier to make choices when you can ask, does this align with who I want to become? If yes, you move forward. If not, you let it go. This clarity reduces wasted time and energy. It makes decisions less fearful and more purposeful. You may start to prioritize community in new ways. Community shifts from being just convenient to being intentional. You'll seek people who are doing the inner work, who are honest about struggle and gentle about success. These companions aren't perfect. They're present. They lift without demanding a return on investment in the old transactional ways. You'll find belonging that feels like a soft landing rather than a performance. Physical spaces begin to matter differently. Your home becomes less about mirroring someone else's taste and more about reflecting what calms and inspires you. You may clear clutter that represents old expectations. The objects you keep will have meaning, not mere nostalgia. Your environment will increasingly support rest and creativity. You will also notice a growing tolerance for uncertainty. The urge to freeze things in place diminishes as you accept that life is fluid. You develop the muscle to wait and watch, to take steps that are provisional, and to change them if necessary. This flexibility is freeing. It lets you move with curiosity instead of fear. There are practical tools that help during this transition. You might journal to track changes and notice patterns. You might set weekly intentions instead of rigid goals. You could find a therapist, coach, or trusted confidant who helps you see blind spots. These supports aren't signs of weakness. They are resources that elevate your capacity to transform. As you continue, you might wonder whether you're allowed to want more. The answer is yes. Wanting more doesn't dismiss gratitude for what you had. It simply acknowledges that you're alive and capable of evolving. Desire can be a gentle flame, not a voracious hunger. It can guide you toward deeper alignment rather than endless consumption. You begin to see that outgrowing is not a rejection of your past self. It's an unfolding of the person you were always capable of becoming. The old life taught you resilience, humor, and survival. Those lessons don't vanish. They integrate. You carry them like tools in a kit, and you use them in new ways. This process is gradual. It asks for patience and persistence. There will be days when you feel like you slipped backward, when old patterns reassert themselves. That's normal. Growth is not linear. Compassion toward yourself during these lapses keeps you steady. You pick up where you left off, not with shame, but with curiosity. And somewhere along the line, you'll notice the jacket no longer constricting. The stitches hold because you mended them differently. You'll find that the life you're shaping fits in new ways, roomy enough for exploration, tailored enough for integrity. The edges that once chafed now frame a silhouette you recognize and respect. You may not know the final shape of the person you're becoming, and you don't need to. The unknown will always be part of the human story. What matters is that you're listening, choosing, and allowing the slow, steady changes to happen. You're learning how to be tender with yourself while you move forward, and so you carry on. You make small, deliberate choices. You protect your time. You cultivate friendships that reflect your current values. You honor the sadness and the joy. You let curiosity guide you into new rooms of your life. Above all, you stay available to the quiet, insistent truth. You are changing, and that change is moving you toward a fuller expression of yourself. You begin to notice how your attention itself changes. Where you once scrolled aimlessly, you now catch yourself pulling back. The hours you gave to noise feel heavy. You'd rather invest in a few deep things than many shallow ones. Depth becomes a quiet preference, not a performance. You carve out long, unbroken stretches for reading, thinking, or simply being. Those stretches teach you how your mind works when it isn't constantly interrupted. Your conversations shift in tone. Instead of defaulting to the surface, you lean into questions that invite reflection. You ask about values and small rituals, about failures that taught lessons and moments that surprised. People respond to that tone in different ways. Some rise to it and show you parts of themselves you hadn't seen. Others pull back. Both reactions give you information. You learn to be brave enough to ask and calm enough to receive the answer. Whatever it is, as your inner life deepens, your external choices begin to align more consistently. Clothing choices, for instance, start to feel intentional. You pick garments that comfort and ground you rather than impress. Your home becomes a backdrop for presence. You might introduce plants, soft lighting, or a chair where you can read without interruption. These small shifts create a container for the person you're becoming. You'll find your compass in rhythm rather than event. Instead of waiting for a singular transformative moment, you recognize that habits compound like interest. Tiny changes, an extra 30 minutes of sleep, a daily walk, a consistent practice of gratitude, accumulate into substantial shifts. This rhythm fosters resilience. It makes the unfamiliar feel less intimidating because you arrive there slowly, step by step. Relationships that once felt inevitable now become choices you make with intention. You stop doing things out of obligation alone. You start to invest where reciprocity and growth exist. That decision can sting, especially when it involves family or long-term friends. You'll question loyalty and love, wondering how to balance them with honesty. The answer rarely comes in a single conversation. It arrives over time, in patterns of care, attention, and mutual respect. You'll also notice a change in how you handle criticism. Previously, you might have taken negative feedback as proof of inadequacy. Now, you filter critique through discernment. Useful observations you integrate. Toxic judgments you let go of. You get better at separating truth from projection. That clarity makes it easier to stay on course without becoming defensive. Time management becomes kinder. Instead of packing your schedule until it frays, you leave margin. Margin feels luxurious at first because you're not used to it. Over time, it becomes essential. It allows for spontaneous moments, for rest when the body asks, and for creative impulses that need a little breathing room. Life with margin is less urgent and more spacious. You begin to value integrity in small things. Returning a call, keeping a promise to yourself, showing up where you said you would. These acts matter. They build trust with yourself. You find that when your internal promises are honored, you carry less friction into your days. Your energy is freed for projects that require attention and care. There's a reorientation toward curiosity about process rather than outcome. You start to enjoy learning for its own sake. The end result matters, but not as a single-minded destination. You take pleasure in the messy middle, those in-between moments, the drafts, the practice runs, the imperfect conversations, become where growth happens. You loosen your grip on needing immediate mastery. You also become more honest about capacity. Before, you might have said yes and then scrambled to fulfill obligations. Now, you say yes when you can commit fully and no when you can't. This honesty protects both you and others. People come to know you as reliable. That reputation opens doors to deeper collaboration because others can trust your consistency. As you outgrow the old life, your relationship with confidence transforms. Confidence stops being a mask you wear and becomes a quiet companion. It's less about proving anything and more about moving from a place of stable curiosity. You show up still learning, still vulnerable, but with a steadiness that invites others to follow. You'll notice changes in how you spend your money. Where bargains once mattered most, value becomes more nuanced. You invest in experiences that enrich your inner world. Courses, travel that broadens perspective, time with mentors. You buy fewer things that promise quick pleasure and more that promise long-term satisfaction. This doesn't mean you become ascetic. It means you align spending with your developing priorities. Your sense of community deepens into mutual growth. You seek people who aren't just fans of your achievements, but companions on the path. These relationships are marked by honesty, accountability, and compassion. They're not always convenient, but they are nourishing. You discover that vulnerability among trusted people accelerates learning and softens loneliness. Health becomes integrated rather than compartmentalized. You no longer see exercise or sleep as separate boxes to check off. They become part of a coherent lifestyle that supports creativity and mental clarity. You care for your body not as punishment, but as a home for your mind and spirit. This shift is practical and tender. At once, you start letting go of stories that no longer serve you. Maybe you believed your worth was tied to productivity, or that rest was selfish. As you shift, those narratives feel cruder. You replace them with kinder truths. You remind yourself that worth is inherent, not earned through busyness. You practice these truths until they feel less like slogans and more like living principles. Creativity becomes less about output and more about expression. You allow yourself to create without a monetization plan. You play. You explore forms and styles that feel true yet unfamiliar. Those experiments may not be profitable immediately. That's okay. In time, they expand your capacity to notice and to express. You notice a clearer relationship with praise. Compliments still feel good, but they don't become the metric of your progress. You begin to value internal feedback. how an action aligns with your values over external applause. That pivot makes decisions easier and more peaceful. There's an emerging emphasis on emotional literacy. You practice naming feelings without dramatizing them. You learn to distinguish between fleeting moods and persistent patterns. That awareness helps you respond rather than react. It gives you space to have hard emotions without letting them dictate permanent changes. You'll find more patience with process. Goals that once felt urgent become projects with timelines that honor learning. You understand that mastery is cumulative, not instantaneous. That patience reduces anxiety and increases pleasure in incremental progress. As you move forward, you start to build rituals that anchor you. A morning practice, an evening wind-down, a weekly check-in with yourself. These rituals create continuity in a life that's otherwise full of change. Rituals don't constrict, they orient. They remind you of what matters when the world pushes for distraction. Your relationship with digital life shifts. You curate feeds to reflect the person you're becoming. Algorithms become tools, not masters. You choose what to consume with intention. You allow silence from devices to be normal. Digital balance opens mental space for reflection and creativity. You might also notice changes in your work relationships. You begin to seek collaboration over competition. You prioritize teams where psychological safety exists, places where people can admit mistakes and learn. You value leadership that models curiosity and vulnerability. That preference shapes where you apply your energy and where you step away. As you refine what matters, you become less attached to being liked by everyone. You realize that universal approval is impossible and that trying to achieve it diffuses your integrity. You become selective with who you please. Pleasing the right people, those who share your values, feels more rewarding than broad approval. You'll encounter discomfort that forces clarity. When someone calls you out, or when you catch yourself repeating an old habit, you have choices. You can shrink back into safety or lean into better alignment. Each decision to lean in strengthens your ability to live intentionally. You'll find yourself celebrating small, private victories. Toasting to finishing a hard piece of writing, savoring a meal made with care, or simply honoring a day you stayed present. These celebrations are intimate and matter more than public recognition. They build a sense of achievement rooted in personal truth. There will be nostalgia, and not all of it will be painful. You'll smile at memories that taught you resilience and kindness. The trick is to let nostalgia be a warm light, not a chain. You can honor the past and still step forward. You begin to seek mentors differently. Instead of only looking up to people who have conquered external milestones, you look for those who have navigated inner transitions with grace. You ask about their failures, their processes, their self-care. These conversations provide models for living a life that matches your evolving values. Boundaries become a continuous practice rather than a one-time decision. Sometimes you'll need to tighten them. Other times you'll loosen them. Boundary work is not punitive. It's clarifying. It helps others know how to love you well. You'll discover that the language you use shapes your experience. You replace condemning phrases with curious ones. Instead of saying, "I failed," you might say, "I learned what doesn't work." Language becomes a tool for resilience instead of a trapdoor to shame. As your life shifts, you'll notice the world responding. Opportunities aligned with your values appear with more frequency. Not everything will be obvious. Sometimes the openings will be subtle. A conversation, a small project, an invitation that feels right. You don't need to sprint after every chance. You choose what resonates. There's a deepening sense of gratitude that is quieter and steadier. It's less about ecstatic appreciation and more about noticing the ordinary blessings. Gratitude becomes a practice that subtlety reshapes perception. It doesn't erase difficulty, but it balances it with recognition of what's good. You begin to trust time again. Where anxiety once pushed you to rush, you now consider long arcs. You think in terms of years and seasons. That outlook makes it easier to tolerate slow growth and to appreciate steady progress. You'll become more selective with emotional labor. You choose where to invest your empathy and when to protect your resources. That discernment doesn't make you unkind. It makes you sustainable. You learn that you can care deeply without burning out. There will be moments of fierce clarity when choices reveal themselves. In those times, you act decisively. Those moments are often preceded by months of quiet work. The clarity feels earned because it is. You'll learn to trust those clear impulses when they arise. Finally, you begin to notice compassion expanding outward. As you become gentler with yourself, you find it easier to be kind to others who are struggling. You understand that everyone is in process. Compassion becomes less conditional and more steady. You offer it without expectation. This continuing transformation is not a project with an end date. It's an ongoing realignment with who you are becoming. You'll keep changing, sometimes in gentle increments, sometimes in leaps. Each shift brings discomfort and possibility. You grow more comfortable with both. You notice an increasing clarity about what you will tolerate and what you won't. That clarity feels like a soft armor. It doesn't make you invulnerable, but it reduces pointless wear and tear. You stop entertaining invitations that cost your peace. You decline conversations that loop into blame or drain. You conserve your attention like a precious resource, and that conservation changes how people show up in your life. You'll find that your language around boundaries becomes simple and calm. You don't need long explanations. A clear statement is enough. People who care will adjust. Those who don't reveal themselves more quickly. That revelation, while uncomfortable, is useful. It spares you future energy spent on trying to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. As your outer life changes, your inner measurements shift too. Success loses its old shape. It's no longer only a tally of achievements or a list of public validations. Success becomes a question you can ask in the quiet of morning. Did I live today in a way that aligns with what matters? If the answer is yes, more often than no, you call it progress. This internal metric steadies you against external storms. You'll notice your friendships refining. Some people will stay close with renewed depth. Others will drift, and it won't feel like betrayal. Change alters the contours of connection. You begin to relish friendships built on shared growth rather than convenience. Those bonds often feel more honest and sustaining. Romantic relationships undergo tests. Old patterns that were tolerable before may now feel intolerable. You might find that you need different things from a partner, emotional availability, a willingness to reflect, aligned life goals. That doesn't mean you won't love someone who doesn't match every new preference. It means you'll be clearer about whether the relationship can evolve or whether it's better to part ways with gratitude. Parenting, if you are a parent, shifts subtly. Your role becomes less about control and more about modeling change. You teach children not by proclamation, but by example, by showing how to choose with integrity, how to admit mistakes, how to rest and rebuild. Those lessons matter more than orders. They teach resilience and curiosity. You become more attuned to small signals from your body. Headaches, tension, or a sense of dread are no longer ignored as mere inconveniences. They prompt questions. What boundary was crossed? What need is unmet? What pattern is repeating? You respond with care instead of denial. That attentiveness prevents burnout and deepens self-trust. Habits of reflection anchor you. You might journal a line each evening, or take a walk to untangle thoughts. These practices aren't grand. They're steady. They create a habit loop where introspection becomes as routine as brushing your teeth. Over time, that simple discipline yields surprising insight. You'll notice an easing around perfectionism. Where you once edited yourself into numbing safety, you now allow drafts and imperfect starts. You learn to separate worth from output. Your work becomes truer because it's less filtered by the need for approval. Vulnerability shows up as honesty instead of performance. There's an emerging skill in holding multiple truths. You can love someone and still recognize that a relationship no longer serves you. You can be grateful for past versions of yourself while also wanting to change. Life becomes less like a verdict and more like a conversation. That nuance lightens heavy moral judgments and opens space for wiser choices. You'll find moments of creative courage. Maybe you start a project that feels risky because it's meaningful. Maybe you finally say something honest in a relationship. These acts are not grand declarations. They're small experiments in authenticity. Each one strengthens your muscle for larger risks later on. Financially, your portfolio of choices becomes more intentional. You adopt spending habits that reflect values, not impulse. You may create buffers to protect your peace emergency funds, sabbatical savings, or investments in learning. These choices feel less like sacrifice and more like care for future freedom. You discover a new relationship with rest. Sleep becomes sacred. Downtime is not laziness, but an investment in creativity and mental health. You learn to rest without guilt. When you rest, you return to your work more focused and more generous. The world doesn't collapse because you slowed down. It simply adjusts to the steadier rhythm you set. You start to notice subtleties in how you receive information. You become skeptical of quick fixes and appealing narratives that promise instant transformation. Instead, you seek approaches grounded in practice and nuance. You prefer slow methods that compound over time. That skepticism protects you from cycles of hype and disappointment. You'll get better at unhooking from other people's expectations. The weight of what others want for you diminishes. This unhooking is not callous. It's clarifying. It lets you respond from a place of integrity rather than reflexive obligation. That freedom reshapes daily decisions in small but impactful ways. As you evolve, You might rediscover play. Playfulness isn't frivolous. It's regenerative. You experiment with hobbies that have no purpose other than delight. You dance in the kitchen. You sketch without judgment. You call a friend to laugh about nothing. Play balances seriousness with lightness and reminds you that living fully is not all toil. You'll learn that apologies matter less than changes. Saying sorry can be easy. Doing the work to change behavior is harder and more significant. You pair admission with effort. That combination rebuilds trust in a way that words alone cannot. Gratitude practice matures. It becomes less about listing pleasant things and more about recognizing the web of support and improbability that led you here. You feel grateful for teachers, for failures, for strangers who were kind in moments you needed it. That broader gratitude softens resentment and fuels generosity. You'll experience a loosening of identity rigidity. You may have identified strongly with a career, a role, or a label. Over time, those identifications become less absolute. You become comfortable exploring new facets of yourself. This fluidity is liberating. It allows you to try on roles and drop them without shame. You notice that your moral imagination expands. You can hold firm values while also seeing the complexity in others. You resist simplistic narratives and prefer compassionate curiosity. That shift makes your response to conflict less reactive and more generative. As boundaries stabilize, your time becomes more available for deep work and meaningful relationships. You produce work that matters to you, not just work that looks impressive to others. That alignment brings a steadier satisfaction that isn't dependent on external applause. You begin to accept that some exits are necessary. Leaving jobs, relationships, or communities can be an act of integrity. It's not always comfortable, but sometimes it's the clearest way to honor your growth. You make departures with respect and without melodrama. Those exits create space for what's next. You'll notice tenderness for younger versions of yourself. You stop punishing past mistakes and start thanking the person who did the best with what they knew. That tenderness includes forgiving yourself and recognizing resilience in your survival strategies. It's a warm, humane perspective that invites further growth. You learn to negotiate needs more skillfully. You ask for what you need clearly and listen when others do the same. These conversations aren't always neat. They require practice. But as you improve, they become less terrifying and more generative of connection. There's also a maturing of ambition. Your goals become inflected with purpose rather than vanity. You want impact more than spectacle. You aim for depth over breadth. That reorientation makes your path more sustainable and more aligned with inner truth. You'll experience a new kind of courage, the courage to simplify. Simplifying doesn't mean less ambition. It means focusing energy where it matters most. You let go of projects that spread you thin. You protect your capacity for meaningful work and relationships. You become better at noticing when rest is discipline rather than indulgence. Prioritizing sleep, slowing down, and refusing the glorification of busyness become practices of stewardship. They enrich your life rather than detract from it. You'll also find a widening compassion for others who are changing slowly. You recognize that people shift at their own pace. You offer space and patience while maintaining your own boundaries. That balance is an expression of mature love. As your inner life settles, you might discover new ways to contribute. Your energy becomes a resource you can use with intention. Mentoring someone, volunteering in a community that matters, creating art that opens conversations. Contribution becomes a choice that aligns with meaning rather than obligation. You start to accept that life's messiness will never entirely resolve. You stop seeking a final, tidy version of yourself and instead learn to befriend uncertainty. That acceptance reduces anxiety and frees you to act from curiosity. You're no longer waiting for perfect conditions to begin. There will be moments of fierce loneliness, yes, but they will alternate with deep connection. Both are part of the process. You'll learn to sit with solitude without panic and to savor intimacy without clinging. That balance becomes a practice that requires vigilance and compassion. You'll become adept at noticing the small crossroads that reveal larger patterns. When a choice keeps recurring, you pay attention. Those signals are honest teachers. You examine the habit beneath the surface and decide whether to reinforce it or change it. That attention to patterns turns daily life into a laboratory for transformation. You'll find that your courage is quietly contagious. When you model honesty and thoughtful boundary setting, others feel permission to try. You'll witness people around you shifting in small ways because you showed them another possible path. That influence is subtle but profound. Finally, you arrive at a steadier sense of belonging that is not dependent on uniformity. You belong because you show up as you are, imperfect and trying. You build circles of people who welcome your questions, your changes, and your quieter triumphs. In those circles, you find refuge and momentum. This transformation, the slow shedding, the careful choosing, the clarified values, does not stop. It continues as you do, in seasons and cycles, in fits and starts. You keep listening to the whispers that tell you you're changing. You make choices that honor that whisper. You let go when holding on would be dishonest. You show up when it requires courage. In the quiet aftermath of choices made with integrity, you will feel a larger, gentler self emerging. It will not be flawless. It will be honest and curious, tired and tender, braver and quieter. That self moves through the world with attention and care. It leaves behind old patterns with gratitude and builds new ones with intention. You are not abandoning your past. You're honoring it by allowing the person who learned those lessons to move forward. You carry its wisdom like a warm stone in your pocket, weighty, comforting, and useful. That stone reminds you of where you came from without binding you to it. Keep listening to the small signals. Keep choosing with patience. Keep practicing the kind of courage that is quieter than fanfare and steadier than spectacle. You are outgrowing your old life, and with each careful step, you are shaping a life that fits more fully. You carry the lessons of your old life forward, gentle with the past and curious about what's next. Keep choosing with intention, resting when you need it, and trusting that each small step is shaping a truer, kinder version of you. Good night.